Welcome to Between Two Psychs, a podcast where two psychologists and board-approved supervisors deep dive into many of the questions and challenges that provisional psychologists and early career therapists face. Your hosts, Isabelle Tombleson and Claire Trevitt, talk about a range of topics, specifically relating to psychologists and therapists who are just starting out.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi, Claire. Nice to see you again.
Yes, back again for Competency 7 today.
That's right. So we are going to be diving deep into Competency 7 from the new Psychology Competencies that we've been covering now for the last few episodes of this season. So I'll read out the title of Competency 7. So demonstrates a health, equity, and human rights approach when working with people from diverse backgrounds. Let's get into it.
Yes, let's. And in terms of this competency and the old competencies, it aligns closely with the working with diverse groups, but I feel that there are a lot of very welcome additions in these new competencies that were not mentioned explicitly in our previous competencies for psychologists.
It's very detailed, yes. So there are 9 different points in Competency Number 7, and I'll just quickly read out the title. So Competency 7 is demonstrates a health, equity, and human rights approach when working with people from diverse backgrounds. And so it's really quite detailed, and I've got quite a few thoughts on it, but I'm wondering, Claire, should we just start from the top?
That's a good idea, I think, because with something like this, there's so much information. I think we want to just talk to it all as much as we can.
Definitely. Okay, so 7.1, it's quite a long description. I probably won't read the whole thing, but it just talks about how overall we are required to be aware of and set aside our own opinions and biases and not prejudice people who come from different backgrounds based on their background. That was my summary or take home from 7.1. What do you think about that?
Yes, I completely agree. It's really about working inclusively. And when we talk about diversity, I mean, we're including age, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, educational attainment, religious, spiritual orientation. There's a lot there. And these, I'm just picking out a few here. So it is. We are, as humans, very diverse, and in Australia we do have people from many different cultural, religious, ethnic backgrounds, and it's really important that everybody in the community is able to access support when they need it.
And I particularly align with 7.1 a lot myself professionally as a psychologist. I've worked in the community drug and alcohol services for the last half decade or whatever, and I do find that there's a lot of social inequality, and in order for us to provide a service that's respectful and thoughtful and non-judgmental, it's really important that we are all able to engage with our consumers in a way that is thoughtful and understanding of those backgrounds and to not judge. Just that particular community where I work, I find that's where I can do a lot of my best work because I'm able to apply a really non-judgmental and empathic, unconditional approach, no matter what a person's been through or what they may have done through the process of their journey.
Yeah, it's so important, like you said, because there are so many people coming from areas of disadvantage, and it really should go without saying. When I see this written down very explicitly, as I read it, I think really we should all be doing this, and we should have all been doing this. But I think it's really around that awareness and also that level of maybe unconscious bias that some of us may hold in relation to, or assumptions that we may hold in relation to certain differences that people may have, and really being aware of those. And that's also woven into the new code of conduct as well.
And it's interesting. I wonder, how does a person do that? How do we go from having the experiences that we've had and we've been shaped through the community that we've been raised in? We've decided to go and pursue a career in a health service where we are providing intimate support to vulnerable people. I wonder how it is that we are able to become more aware of our biases and to set those aside in order to provide treatment. Like you mentioned that we should all be doing that, but I feel like that would be quite a big thing to be able to learn and adapt and to do.
And I think this is where the education comes in and the supervision comes in, so that we are, if we're working in certain areas of difference, where we are working with individuals. So, for example, if we're working in a service that provides support for particular ethnic groups or cultural groups, that we need to take it upon ourselves to educate ourselves in what is actually required. And that does include a number of elements, I think, that are woven through these set of competencies, one of them being trauma informed. And
Mm,
because when we think about some of these people, particularly moving to Australia from different backgrounds and thinking about the experiences that they may have through, trauma often features quite heavily. So just being aware of the impact of trauma is so important, and this is woven into this
mm,
competency. Also awareness of neurodiversity, and
mm,
because we are becoming much more aware of the number of people who are impacted and are being diagnosed with ADHD, autism, and other forms of neurodivergence, and being aware of what that means and what accommodations these people might need. I think there's a lot of education that we might need to do around this competency
mm.
in order to provide the service that we need to provide for people. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I tend to agree. I do think this competency makes me think personally about what areas of development I might need to explore in my learning plan for the next 12 months. Certainly around understanding neurodiversity and working in a neuroaffirming manner with consumers who might, have a diagnosis. And I do think, as you said, that the journey towards developing and acquiring knowledge and becoming equitable with all of our consumers, that's just going to be an ongoing process. This competency highlights the importance of that. And I do feel as though many of us are now going to be highlighting this as an area for development in our learning plans moving forward for the next several years and hopefully ongoing.
I think it's going to involve, yeah, like you said, it's going to involve a lot of ongoing reflection. Let's start that again. I think it's going to involve a lot of ongoing reflection from us, as you say, for a number of years, and ongoing, really. And also, I think looking at our own social sort of, sorry, that's the wrong word, and looking at our own background and how that might influence and impact our work as well. Like, I'm aware that we're two white females. We're both
Mm,
educated. We both have a level of privilege that many of our clients may not experience. And being aware of those things, what we may convey as we go into the therapy room with some of our clients who may present with some level of disadvantage, I think is also so important, because we need to try and relate to people, and sometimes our experiences, our personal experiences and our lived experiences align, and sometimes they don't. And
mm.
being really aware of that too, I think, is so important.
I have a question. Sometimes we meet people who choose to work with certain people of certain backgrounds, religions, or cultures because it aligns with their background, religion, or culture, or whatever the diversity type might be. And is this competency saying that's okay? Or is this competency asking all of us, even if we've decided to choose to work with certain backgrounds because that's where we feel comfortable, to say, no, we need to be mindfully approaching this moving forward so that everyone who we may encounter in our roles can receive an equitable, safe service?
And there's two things here. One is around the competencies themselves and their sort of threshold competency, and
Mm,
how the expectation is that we will perform at threshold or above for in those areas where we are working and in
mm,
our areas of practice. So of course, if this is an area of practice for us, we would be expected to be across this. At the same time, I'm thinking about provisional psychologists coming in and needing to meet that basic level of competence across all areas. And as psychologists, us having basic sort of threshold level of competence across all of these competencies so that we can be prepared for perhaps if we do need to work with people from a background that is new to us,
Mm,
or at least that we have the right information
mm,
to direct these people. So if it's something that we don't do, so somebody might come in and say, look, for example, I have a child who is currently was born male and is looking to transition, and that might be an area that I don't necessarily have a lot of experience in terms of working with young people, in terms of what that might look like, but I would certainly know of services that would be
mm,
able to support that individual. And I
mm,
also have worked enough in that space to
mm.
be able to provide what I would hope would be a non-judgmental and affirming space for which that parent could begin to explore, even if I wasn't the person to provide the service.
Thank you so much for that example, Claire. That's actually a beautiful way to demonstrate how even if we're not fully able to provide the unique service that a certain person from a certain background or a certain situation might need, how we can still support that person to navigate and commence their journey in a non-judgmental way.
Yes, I'd hope that we could at least set somebody on that journey, but also sometimes there may not be other clinicians or there may be a waiting list for some of these services, so we may need to hold these clients.
And this happens in rural and regional areas all the time.
Yeah, yeah, it would. I think that it's something that we all need to be aware of. So as we read through this, we might say, I don't work with clients necessarily that are presenting with some of these different, I'm not necessarily working in trauma. I don't really work with many neurodivergent clients, although I think we're all realizing that we're working a lot more with neurodivergence than we may have done previously. It becomes our responsibility to upskill in these areas. But we may
Mm.
look at this list and think, I'm working with a particular group and it doesn't particularly, I don't feel like there's much diversity in my practice. But I think when we do look a bit deeper, there's diversity everywhere.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I guess maybe having knowledge of competency seven might prompt us to think a little bit more carefully about that and recognize that, yes, there is diversity everywhere. And we might think that we're working with a particular population with common traits and things like that. But like if we're really doing a thorough psychological assessment, I guess we should be discovering that there's usually a lot more to the story.
Yes, there usually is. And so competency seven applies to all of us, and we are all required to really attend to this. My recommendation with any of these competencies is to read them and
Mm,
to think about any areas that feel a little bit new or feel like you need a little bit more information on. They're normally the areas that we would need to be thinking
mm.
about, learning more about. And I think many of us will be looking through these new competencies. And as you said, Isabel, it will be informing our professional development the next year and probably many more years.
That's right. That's right. Hey, Claire, I also just want to mention 7.2. This one I really loved. I thought, oh, it's so brilliant that they thought to include this around having knowledge and understanding of the psychological theories and practices that have happened before in our profession and the impacts on certain diverse groups. And I'm speaking about gay conversion therapy, that being gay used to be a diagnosis in the DSM, just a couple of
Mhm.
examples there. I
Yes.
think that I just love that was included.
Yeah, that's a good example too, because some of these psychological theories would have been disproven, and it is up to us to keep up to date with the knowledge and
Mm,
and the research in terms of what is best practice in terms of working with disability, working with neurodivergence. I think about even thinking about psychological assessments and say cognitive assessments, just looking at the language that we're using now in terms of how we can support people and how we can provide accommodations as opposed to the
Mm.
deficit-based language
Mm.
many of us would have been taught at university
Yeah, yeah, that's right. That's
not so
right.
long ago.
That's right. We are definitely in a modern world where a lot of our practices are changing. And I think there are a lot of communities who will be grateful that we are modernizing and being more inclusive. And I think that is probably the overall aim of Competency 7
Mm.
is that everyone's needs to be brought up to the same standard and to represent the psychology profession in a way where we can all be consistent with each other about how we provide our service in a culturally safe and diversity safe manner.
And although we've come a long way, we probably haven't come far enough yet. There's still so much prejudice, so much inequity that does exist. And this is a really important sort of foundational point that we all need to be adhering to and ensuring that we do practice in this way. And then we're not ticking off this, okay, I've done my training in cultural competence, but actually really reflecting on what that really looks like in our own practice and thinking
Mm,
about ways that we can really improve and refine this. And a
mm.
lot of this will be done in with our clients as well, in terms of determining whether or not we are providing the right services for our clients and where else we can direct them for support.
So I'm thinking about how Competency 7 in particular will be really important for those of us who are wanting to take absorb it and to reflect on it. Having a great supervisor or peer supervision group will be really valuable for our learning journey. And so not just, as you said, attending some training and saying, yep, tick the box, I've attended that training. It's that ongoing reflective practice with a group of peers or a one-on-one supervisor who are able to support that learning and that growth will be so valuable.
Yes, absolutely. It is that ongoing learning is so important. The other thing I think is really important to mention here as well is learning from people with lived experience. And as supervisors, sometimes I know this happens to me, somebody will come and say, look, I'm looking for a specific experience in something. And I'll say, that's not necessarily either my lived experience or it's not necessarily an area that I have expertise in. And so being able to learn from people with lived experience, I think, is also really important here because this is how we begin to learn what is required to support these areas of difference.
So in saying that, it's really interesting to think about. So I certain services may not have formal accesses to people with lived or living experience, such as peer workers or peer representatives or consultants. In my service, we do because it's like a government funded service, and we're starting to become more aware of the importance of that now. How does one seek information or consult or meet with people with lived and living experiences to help them to grow and inform themselves when they're, say, working in a private practice?
Yeah, or not all of our supervisors have that level of experience, as you're saying, but a lot of training is provided by people with lived experience. I'm thinking about
Mm,
even in areas such as like dissociation or dissociative identity disorder. There's a lot of literature and there are a lot of
mm,
resources from people who have lived experience, neurodivergence.
mm.
There are a lot of, again, organisations, a lot of resources that would be provided, and so ensuring that the information that you're using is coming from valid and reliable sources as well. Obviously, it needs to be psychologically robust too. There is a lot of lived experience and a lot of people who with lived experience who are psychologists who provide training and resources in
Mm,
areas. And yeah, and it might be there's a lot of Facebook groups, say for psychologists, where you can ask for information. I'm in a few of those groups and I ask a question and you often get people very generously giving information. Using your resources and your networks so using your networks to
mm,
to find the right resources and good training
mm.
that depending on the areas that you're going to focus on. But
Lovely.
yeah, that would be my
I,
suggestion.
I've noticed a couple of online recordings of talks through a few different organizations have included a piece from a person with lived or living experience. There was a fantastic talk, a drug and alcohol related talk. I think it's from the Matilda Centre's website, and they had a peer worker do a talk before the professional person did their speak. And I was so moved by it. It was really moving and just a remarkable ability to share their vulnerability and share their story, but with the view or with the goal of helping clinicians to be more informed and understanding of that diverse experience and their background. And yeah, I do think you're right. I think more and more people will be thinking about how to include a lived and living experience voice in many different spaces, I think, moving forward. And that was just one great example that I remember recently.
Yeah, and it's beautiful when you can actually learn from these directly from people who can really speak to what it's like. I'm also noticing a lot of I've noticed some trainings pop up run by psychologists, maybe from different cultural backgrounds, on cultural awareness of cultural competency. And these people can really speak from experience
Mm,
around some of those maybe difficulties that people experience. One of the things that, that I've heard a number of times is that it's not the client's job to educate us. And so it really is for us to educate ourselves. Obviously, every client is so different, and we do want to hear about each client's unique experience because one person's experience of depression is going to be different to another person's experience of depression. And we need to understand what it's like for our client, but there are certain elements, I think, around cultural competence that we need to actually be really aware of. And so it is for us to do some education in this area. And as a white female, and I'm from the UK, and I don't feel as equipped necessarily to support people from a range of other, no, I don't want to say that.
you're right.
I think as somebody who identifies as probably quite privileged and someone who hasn't experienced the level of marginalisation, I'm a white educated female, I feel as though maybe I don't necessarily have the lived experience that some of these other clinicians may be
Mm.
able to provide. I don't know where I'm going with this.
So lots of opportunities to learn, really, this is what we've said now in regard to competency 7. We've just really reflected on the lots of opportunities to learn and how we all will hopefully digest competency 7 and allow it to embed itself into our practice and make us more open to engaging in learning opportunities, to seek knowledge, and be able to allow the community, the very diverse community that we serve in Australia, to have their health needs met safely and in a useful way as well.
Yeah, yeah, I think, yeah, it really is about coming back to the health equity and human rights approach and how
Okay.
we provide that for all of our clients.
I think that's a great way to sum it up. Thank you, Claire.
Thanks, Isabel. Yes, it's a big one, but such an important one.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for tuning in today. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to leave us a 5-star rating. It really helps others find the show. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Between Two Psychs for more updates and resources. For more information and to explore everything we offer, head over to our website, betweentwopsychs.com.au. We appreciate your support and we'll see you next time.